Hey guys, tonight we are heading back in time to the American Wild West. But forget everything you've seen in the movies. We're not here for the epic gunfights, the noble sheriffs, or the stoic heroes riding off into a perfectly clean sunset. No, we're going to peel back that romantic, leather-clad veneer and dive head first into the grimy, smelly, and frankly disgusting reality of daily life on the frontier. You're about to become a cowboy, and trust me, your chances of surviving the journey are less threatened by a stray bullet and more by an infected blister or a sip of the wrong water. It's a side of history that's a lot less glamorous, but a whole lot more real. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop me a comment and let me know what city you're in and what time it is for you. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1873. You're standing on a dusty street corner, not in some rugged frontier town just yet, but in a bustling, chaotic city, Louisville, Kansas City. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and industry. But your mind isn't here. It's fixed on a colorful, slightly peeling poster plastered to a brick wall. It depicts someone, a cowboy silhouetted against a vast, orange sky, a chest all lean and impossibly heroic, and a chance to make your fortune in the untamed West. It speaks of wide-open plains where a man can be his own master. You've heard the stories. The Civil War ended less than a decade ago, and the country is hungry not just for opportunity, but for beef. Down in Texas, millions of wild longhorn cattle roam free, and the railroads pushing west need to be connected to this moving gold mine. This is the great cattle boom, the engine driving this entire fantasy. They need men. Tough men. Men like the one on the poster. Men like you, or so you hope. You've made your decision. You sell what little you own, buy a ticket for a train that will take you as far south and west as it can go, and pack a small bag with your hopes. The romantic lie is a powerful thing. You imagine yourself galloping across endless fields of green. The wind in your hair, which, in your imagination, is surprisingly clean. You picture yourself sitting around a crackling campfire at night, singing trail songs with your newfound brothers in arms, a tin cup of coffee in your hand. The poster didn't mention the lice. It didn't mention the dysentery. And it certainly didn't mention the smell. As you stand on the crowded platform waiting for your train, you look around at the other young men who seem to be heading in the same direction. They're a motley crew. Some are fresh-faced farm boys like you, with eyes full of naive ambition. Others have a harder look, veterans from the war, both blue and grey, still searching for a place in a country that has moved on without them. You're surprised to see a number of black faces, and men speaking Spanish with quiet intensity. This is a little-known fact of the cowboy era. A significant percentage of these legendary American figures were not the white Anglo-Saxons of Hollywood lore. They were former slaves, Mexicans, and Native Americans, all seeking a life, however harsh, on the open range. The West was a marginally more level playing field where the ability to rope a steer or handle a horse mattered more than the color of your skin. You feel a strange mix of excitement and a tiny, creeping dread. The man who signed you, a fast-talking agent with a stained vest and a yellow-toothed smile, promised you a steady wage, food, and a horse. It sounded like a good deal, but what he didn't explain, and what you're about to learn, is the true cost of that deal. It was just about hard work. It was about surrendering to a level of filth that would make a modern person recoil, feeling the thin fabric of your only spare shirt inside. The idea of hygiene is still a vague concept in your mind, something for city folks and the wealthy. Out there on the trail, you'll learn a new set of rules. Historians still debate the primary motivation that drove these hundreds of thousands of men into such a grueling life. Was it the genuine pull of the manifest destiny ideal, the romantic notion of taming a wild frontier? Was it the economic desperation of a post-war nation, where this was simply the only paying job available to a vast, drifting population of young men? Or was it a more profound psychological need for escape, a desire to leave behind a society of strict rules and suffocating expectations for a world where the only law was the horizon as you stand there, About to step onto the train, you don't have the answer. You're just a kid who believed a poster. The reality, in all its unwashed glory, is waiting for you at the end of the line. The train ride is a jarring, rattling affair. For days you are shaken and swayed, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels a constant companion. The lush green farmlands of the east gradually give way to a drier, dusty and infinitely larger landscape. The sky seems to get bigger with every passing mile. The towns you pass through become smaller, rougher collections of unpainted wooden buildings that look like they were thrown together in a hurry and could be blown away by a strong gust of wind. You and the other hopefuls on the train fall into a quiet apprehension. The bravado from the city platform has evaporated, replaced by the silent, shared understanding that you are traveling far from everything you have ever known. Finally, the train groans to a halt. This is it. The end of the line. You step out not into a bustling town, but onto a simple wooden platform surrounded by little more than a water tower, a small depot, and a sea of brown, dusty earth stretching to the horizon. Waiting there is a man who looks like he was carved from the landscape itself. H.E.S. leathery, squint-eyed with a grin set to his jaw. This is your trail boss. He wastes no time on pleasantries. He sizes you and the other greenhorns up with a look that hovers somewhere between pity and contempt. He gathers you all around and lays out the terms in a voice as dry as the dirt under your feet. The pay is $30 a month. The company provides the horse, the grub, and the shared space under the stars. Everything else is on you. And by everything else, he means everything. This is your first real lesson cowboying is a BYO affair. Bring your own gear. You look down at your small, sad bag. You suddenly feel very, very underprepared. This is where you receive your newcomer's package, and it's less of a gift and more of a stark reality check. There are no uniforms, no company-issued supplies. The trail boss points to a coarse-looking pile of bedrolls. You get to pick one. You unroll it to find two thin, scratchy wool blankets and a piece of heavy canvas to wrap them in. This, you are told, is your towel, or so you GN, and it will be your bed, your chair, and your only shelter for the next 3 to 4 months. It will be home to your possessions which, as you're about to find out, are pitifully few. Then comes the real shocker. The trail boss looks at your clothes, your simple farm trousers and cotton shirt, and gives a short, humorless laugh. He asks if you brought a change of clothes. You proudly indicate your bag, where your one spare shirt is neatly folded. He shakes his head. You'll be wearing what you've got on now until we hit Kansas, he says. Maybe you'll get to wash it once, if a river is high and the sun is hot. The idea is so foreign, so unsanitary, that you can't process it. Weeks, months in the same clothes. You're about to learn a fundamental truth of the trail. There is no space for excess. Everything you own must fit into that bedroll, which gets tossed onto the chuck wagon every morning. There's no room for sentiment, and certainly no room for a wardrobe. Your worldly possessions now consist of your clothes, your bedroll, a tin-plated cup, maybe a pocket knife. And if you were smart, a sturdy hat. That's your entire existence, rolled up into a canvas suit. As you stand there, absorbing this new reality, you notice the seasoned hands, the real cowboys, don't even seem to register these conditions. They move with an economy of motion. Their gear worn but functional. You also learn a rather intimate and uncomfortable detail. One of the older cowboys, seeing the look on your face, offers a piece of advice. He tells you to get used to the feel of rough fabric against your skin, because under those heavy denim or canvas trousers, most cowboys were nothing. Underwear was considered an unnecessary luxury, an extra layer that would just get sweaty, bunched up and filthy. It was one more thing to worry about, so most simply went without. The chafing, you're reassured, is something you eventually stop noticing. Historians and economists are still debating the labor dynamics of this arrangement. Were these cattle barons exploiting a vulnerable workforce, paying meager wages for grueling, dangerous work while forcing the men to provide their own expensive equipment, like saddles, which could cost more than a month's pay? Or was this simply the accepted reality of a free market, a tough but fair deal for men who valued the independence and autonomy of the cowboy life above all else? For you, standing there in the dust, It's not an academic debate. It's the cold, hard contract you just implicitly signed. The romance of the poster is now a distant memory. Your grand adventure has been boiled down to a single, itchy set of clothes and an endless supply of dirt. The only thing you seem to have in abundance is the one thing the trail boss mentioned you'd need most: endurance. An inexhaustible, bottomless well of it. You're going to need every last drop. Now that you've been stripped of your naive expectations, it's time to get dressed for the job. You quickly realize that your farm clothes are not going to cut it. A real cowboy's outfit wasn't a fashion statement. It was a carefully selected set of tools, a suit of armor designed to battle the elements, the environment, then the sheer, pervasive filth of the trail. You look at the veteran hands and see your future uniform. It starts from the top down. Your hat, that wide-brimmed felt hat, what would one day become the iconic Stetson, isn't just to look cool. It's your umbrella in the rain, your sunshade in the scorching heat. You can use it to scoop water from a stream, a questionable practice you'll soon adopt without a second thought, or to fan the flames of a dying campfire. It's a signaling device to other riders from a distance and, in a pinch, a pillow. The high crown isn't for show either. It creates a pocket of air that helps keep your head cool. This is your most essential piece of gear. Losing your hat on the prairie could be a genuine, life-threatening disaster. Next, the bandana or neckerchief, tied loosely around your neck. It's not a decorative flourish. When you're riding at the back of a herd of 1,000 cattle, the position reserved for rookies like you, known as riding drag, you'll be living in a permanent cloud of dust. That bandana gets pulled up over your nose and mouth, becoming a primitive but vital dust mask. It's your washcloth, your towel, your bandage, your coffee filter, and even a temporary sling for an injured arm, made it easy to spot if you dropped it. Then you have the shirt. You'll quickly trade your flimsy cotton for coarse, sturdy wool. This seems counterintuitive. Wool in the Texas heat, but you learn that wool has almost magical properties. It insulates you when it's cold and, surprisingly, it can keep you cooler when it's hot. More importantly, wool can absorb up to 1/3 of its weight in moisture before it feels wet, wicking sweat away from your skin. It also doesn't hold odor as badly as cotton, a small but significant mercy when you're not changing it for a month. A wool shirt could be caked in sweat and dust and still provide a semblance of protection. Your trousers are where things get serious. They'll be made of heavy-duty wool canvas, or that rugged new fabric that's gaining popularity, denim. Levi Strauss had started making his tough-as-nails waist overalls for miners in California, and their reputation was spreading. Whatever the material, your pants will be battered, stained, and patched multiple times. They need to withstand constant friction against a rough leather saddle, scrapes from thorny brush, and the occasional spark from the campfire. They are less an article of clothing and more a layer of industrial-grade protective equipment. Over your pods, you'll wear chaps. These aren't the flamboyant, tassel things you might see in a Wild West show. Early chaps, often called shotgun chaps, were simple, straight-legged leather coverings that protected your legs from cactus spines, thorny mesquite, and rope burns. They also provided an extra layer of warmth on cold mornings. They were heavy, cumbersome, and absolutely essential. Finally, your boots. Cowboy boots have that distinctive high heel for a very specific reason: to keep your foot from sliding through the stirrup. Getting a foot caught in the stirrup, or being dragged by a panicked horse, was a common and gruesome way to die. The pointed toe helped guide your foot into the stirrup quickly, and the lack of laces meant the boot might pull off in a fall, freeing your foot. They weren't made for walking. They were miserably uncomfortable to walk in for any distance, which reinforced a cowboy's primary identity: you were a man who lived on a horse. There is a fascinating and often overlooked detail about this gear: its cost. A good hat could cost $5, a pair of boots $10 or $15, and a quality saddle which you were often expected to provide yourself could run you $40 or more. That's well over a month's wages. Many cowboys were in a state of perpetual debt to the company store or the cattle baron who fronted them the gear. This created a cycle of dependency that is rarely depicted in the heroic narrative. You weren't a free agent, you were often a company man in everything but name. Historians are still trying to piece together the exact supply chains and economic models that equipped these men. How did a hat made in Philadelphia or a pair of jeans from San Francisco end up on a young cowboy in the middle of Texas? The expansion of the railroads was key, but so was a complex network of merchants, outfitters, and opportunistic sellers who followed the cattle trails. There's a whole economic history hidden in the seams of your filthy denim pants. You're just trying to scrape together enough gear to not look like a complete fool. You trade your spare shirt and a few dollars for a worn, stained wool shirt from another hand. You invest in a cheap, sweat-stained hat. You're no longer a farm boy. You are now wearing the uniform of your new life. It feels stiff, heavy, and smells faintly of someone else's sweat. Welcome to the herd. The work begins before the sun even hints at rising. A loud grating yell from the cook Chuck A. Luck, "Come and get it," shatters the prolonged stillness. You scramble out of your bedroll, the cold, damp air hitting you like a physical slap. The ground is hard, and every muscle in your body aches from the first few days in the saddle. But there's no time to complain. The day has started, and it waits for no one. This is where you are introduced to the defining sensory experience of your new life, the smell. It's not just one smell, but a complex, layered symphony of odors that will become the permanent backdrop to your existence. You swing into the saddle, your horse still warm from its own sleep, and the scent of horse sweat and leather fills your nostrils. It's a rich, earthy smell, and it's the cleanest thing you'll encounter all day. You and the other greenhorns are assigned to the rear of the herd, the dreaded drag position. The trail boss doesn't do this to be cruel, it's the safest spot for rookies. The more experienced hands ride at the point and on the flank, guiding the direction of the massive, moving river of cattle. Your job is to keep the stragglers, the slow, the weak, and the stubborn from falling behind. And so you spend 10 to 12 hours a day enveloped in a thick, choking cloud. It's a mixture of fine, powdery dust kicked up by 2,000 pairs of hooves, and the tomatized, sun-baked particles of manure. It coats everything. It gets in your eyes, making them read and draw. It gets in your nostrils, in your mouth, grinding between your teeth with a gritty persistence. You pull your bandana up, but it only helps so much. After a few hours, the fabric is caked with a brown film. You swallow it, you live in it. Then there's the smell of the cattle themselves. A heavy, bovine odor that hangs in the hot, still air. It's the scent of hot hide, sour breath, and the constant, low-level aroma of digestion. Mixed into this is the ever-present, sharp tang of their waste. You're riding through a landscape that is being continuously fertilized by the very animals you're herding. When the wind is right or wrong, depending on your perspective, it all wafts back and settles over you like a blanket. And then there is your own contribution to this olfactory tapestry. The Texas sun is relentless. Within an hour of starting, sweat is pouring down your back, soaking the wool shirt that is already stiff with yesterday's dried sweat. The salt stings the chafed skin on your neck and under your arms. There's no such thing as deodorant. The concept doesn't even exist. Every man on the drive is radiating his own potent brand of body odor, a mixture of stale sweat dirt and the faint, sour smell of unwashed clothes slowly beginning to rot. When you all gather around the chuck wagon for a meal, the collective aroma is staggering. But after a week on the trail, you barely even notice it anymore. It's just the smell of work. Here's a small bizarre detail you learn from one of the older hands. He tells you that some cowboys believed that a thick enough layer of dirt and sweat actually formed a protective barrier on the skin, a crust that could ward off insects and even sun exposure. The idea of washing it off would be, in their view, counterproductive, exposing soft, clean skin to the harsh elements. There's a strange logic to it, a folk wisdom born of extreme circumstances. Academics who study the history of medicine and hygiene call this a vernacular health belief, a system of health maintenance developed outside of formal medical science. It's a fancy term for a deeply held conviction that being filthy was, in a way, good for you. You learn to read the smells. The scent of rain on dry earth, a welcome promise of relief from the dust. The faint, sweet smell of a cottonwood grove, signaling a river and a place to rest the herd. And the worst smell of all, the sickly sweet, cloying odor of decay, which meant a cow had died somewhere up ahead, its carcass bloating in the sun. This was a smell that could make even the most hardened cowboy's stomach turn. Historians often debate the psychological impact of this constant sensory overload. Did living in such conditions numb the senses, or did it heighten them, forcing these men to become hyper-aware of their environment in ways a modern person couldn't comprehend? Did the relentless stench and grime contribute to the legendary stoicism and taciturn nature of the cowboy, a man who had simply shut down the parts of his brain that would otherwise be screaming in protest as you ride along, your teeth grinding on grit, a film of filth covering every inch of your exposed skin? You don't have a grand theory. You just know that this is your world now. The epic vistas of the West are still there. The sunsets are still magnificent, but you see them through a constant, hazy filter of dust, and you experience them with a nose full of the unmistakable perfume of the cattle drive. After a long, grueling day in the saddle, breathing dust and prodding recalcitrant cattle, the sight of the chuck wagon is a vision of heaven. It's the logistical and social heart of the entire cattle drive, and the man who runs it is, arguably, the most important person on the trail, even more so than the trail boss. He is the camp cook, affectionately or fearfully known as Cookie, Kusai, or, if you know what's good for you, sir. You ride into the makeshift camp as the sun bleeds across the horizon. The cook has already chosen the spot, always near wood water if possible. The wagon itself is a masterpiece of frontier engineering. It's a standard, sturdy farm wagon that has been heavily modified for its purpose. At the back is the iconic chuck box, a large wooden cabinet with a hinged lid that drops down to form a workspace. Inside is a marvel of organization. Dozens of small drawers and cubbies hold everything from flour, sugar, and salt to spices, utensils, and medical supplies. Everything has its place. It's a mobile kitchen, pantry, and pharmacy all in one. The cook's authority is absolute. A set of unwritten but strictly enforced rules governs his domain. You do not, under any circumstances, tie your horse to the chuck wagon. You don't use the wagon for shade, and you never ever serve yourself coffee. The coffee pot is perpetually on the fire, but only the cook can pour it. It's a matter of camp hygiene, such as it isn't a matter of a faster way to get fired than losing a dozen head of cattle. You dismount, your legs feeling like stiff, bowed stilts after so many hours on horseback. You grab your tin plate and cup from your bedroll and approach the fire, where the cook is dishing out tonight's meal. The menu on a cattle drive is monotonous, designed for high-calorie content and longevity, not culinary artistry. The foundation of every meal is beans, oft uncooled prairie strawberries, and sourdough biscuits, baked in a heavy cast iron Dutch oven buried in hot coals. The meat is, ironically for a cattle drive, rarely fresh beef. The cattle you're herding are living money. You don't eat the profits unless an animal breaks a leg and has to be put down. Most of the meat is salted pork or bacon, greasy and intensely flavorful, which helps mask the taste of everything else. Sometimes, if the cook is feeling ambitious, he'll make us a Norfolk beef stew, a concoction made from the undesirable parts of a freshly killed calf, the heart, liver, tongue, and brains. Its name was supposedly what a cowboy would exclaim upon learning what was in it. And then there's the coffee. It's the fuel that keeps the whole operation running. It's made in a massive pot, boiled over the open fire. The cook throws in the coffee grounds, adds water, and lets it boil until it's a thick, black, sludgy liquid that could probably dissolve a horseshoe. To settle the grounds, he might toss in a crushed eggshell or even a splash of cold water, a technique called clearing. You drink it black and scalding hot. It's bitter, gritty, and strong enough to jolt you awake, which is precisely its purpose. Here's a little-known culinary secret of the trail: the use of wild ingredients. A good cook was also a forager. He might gather wild onions, garlic, or lamb's quarter as a type of wild spinach to add some flavor and vitamins to the endless cycle of beans and bacon. If the doctor crossed a river, he might try to catch some fish. These small additions were a welcome break from the monotony and a sign of a truly skilled kusai. As you sit on your bedroll, shoving beans into your mouth with a biscuit, you listen to the quiet murmur of conversation around the fire. This is the only time the cowboys really relax. They talk about the day's events, the behavior of the cattle, the condition of the horses. They tell tall tales and sing mournful songs. But you notice the conversation is sparse. These are not chatty men. They are exhausted, and they know the day starts again in just a few short hours. Historians are still debating the exact nutritional science behind the cattle doctor diet. How did these men survive, let alone perform intense physical labor, on a diet so lacking in fresh vegetables and vitamins? Scurvy was a real, though surprisingly infrequent, danger. The prevailing theory is that the organ meat in the occasional stew, along with the vitamin C in the wild onions and whatever other greens the cook could find, was just enough to keep the worst of the deficiency diseases at bay. It was a diet teetering on the edge of nutritional collapse, yet it worked. After you finish your meal, you take your tin plate and cup over to the rec pan, a tub of greasy, lukewarm water. You give your plate a cursory wipe, scraping the remnants off with your finger, which you then lick clean before swishing it in the communal water. There's no soap. The plate is never truly clean, just less dirty. You dry it on your pants, the same pants you've been wearing for 2 weeks. It's just another layer of grime in a world made of it. Its silhouette dark against the embers of the fire. It's a greasy, unhygienic, rolling kitchen. And right now, it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Out here on the vast, sun-scorched plains, water is life. But it's also a constant, nagging source of anxiety. Finding it, drinking it, and surviving its often dubious quality is a daily challenge that overshadows almost everything else. Your romantic notions of crystal-clear streams babbling through meadows are quickly replaced by a much harsher reality. Your day starts and ends with a desperate search for it. The trail boss plans the entire route not around the fastest path, but around known water sources. A typical day's drive of 10 to 15 miles is calculated to get the herd from one waterhole to the next. The cattle can smell water from miles away, and as you get closer, their pace quickens, a low rumbling excitement passing through the herd. Your own thirst is a constant dry companion in the back of your throat. When you finally reach a water source, it's rarely the picturesque scene you imagined. More often than not, it's a muddy, shallow river with slow-moving, brownish water. Or it's a stagnant pond, its edges trampled into a mire by countless animals, both wild and domestic. The water is often warm, with a distinct earthy flavor that you're still trying to get used to. You see things floating in it: algae, insects, and other unidentifiable bits of organic matter. The cattle, desperate with thirst, plunge into the water, stirring up mud and sediment, and relieving themselves as they drink. The water becomes a murky, contaminated soup. But you're just as thirsty as they are. You dismount, wade in a little upstream from the main herd, a small, often futile gesture of hygiene, and dip your hat. You drink deeply, trying not to think about what you're swallowing. The immediate, desperate need for hydration overrides any sense of revulsion or fear of disease. This is how diseases like cholera and dysentery spread like wildfire. A single contaminated water source could incapacitate an entire cattle drive. The concept of germ theory, the idea that invisible microorganisms cause disease, is still a new and controversial idea back east. Out here, it's completely unheard of. The prevailing belief is the miasma theory, the idea that bad smells from rotting matter create poisonous vapor that causes illness. So if the water doesn't smell too bad, you figure it's probably safe. It's a fatal miscalculation. You learn to judge water by a rough, unscientific set of criteria. Clear, running water is best. Still water is suspect. Water with a high alkaline content, common in the West, has a bitter, soapy taste and can make you violently ill. It was known as Jip was learned to recognize the telltale white residue it left on the ground. Sometimes the only water available is from a seep, a spot where you have to dig down into the mud and wait for a small, filthy puddle to form. You'd be amazed at what you're willing to drink when you're thirsty enough. One of the more peculiar and disgusting facts of life on the trail involves what happened when you were far from any known water source. In desperate situations, cowboys were known to drink the water from a cow's rumen, the first stomach. If a cow was freshly killed, the greenish, watery contents of its rumen were a source of filtered liquid. It sounds revolting, and it was, but it could mean the difference between life and death. It's a grim testament to the harsh realities of survival on the frontier. The coffee pot back at the chuck wagon plays a crucial role in this water drama. Boiling the water to make coffee was one of the single healthiest things you did all day, even if you didn't know why. The intense heat killed most of the dangerous bacteria, making the coffee, despite its sludgy texture, far safer to drink than the water it was made from. This is likely one reason why coffee was consumed in such prodigious quantities. It wasn't just for the caffeine, it was a subconscious public health measure. Historians are still debating the full extent to which waterborne illnesses impacted the great cattle drives. The records are sparse. When a cowboy got sick and died on the trail, he was often buried in a shallow, unmarked grave, his passing noted only by a brief entry in the trail boss's log, if at all. How many of these deaths attributed to fever or stomach trouble were actually cases of cholera, typhoid, or giardiasis? It's impossible to know for sure, but the number is suspected to be high. It's a quiet, unglamorous part of the mortality rate of the West. As you fill your canteen from a muddy riverbank, trying to scoop from a section that looks slightly less murky, you make a choice. You can let the fear of sickness paralyze you, or you can do what everyone else does: take a drink and hope for the best. You choose the latter. You wipe your mouth on your filthy sleeve, the gritty water leaving a muddy taste on your lips. You look out at the vast, indifferent landscape. It's a world that doesn't care if you live or die. Water is just one of the many things out here that can kill you, and it's also the one thing you can't live without. The paradox is as vast and unforgiving as the plains themselves. As night falls, the world shrinks to the small, flickering circle of the campfire. The immense, dark prairie presses in from all sides, alive with the sounds of insects, the distant yip of a coyote, and the soft, shuffling murmurs of the resting herd. Your work isn't over yet. After your meager, greasy meal, it's time to prepare your bed, a ritual that is both simple and fraught with unseen perils. You find a patch of ground that looks relatively flat and free of large rocks. You unroll your sayujian, the heavy canvas start that serves as your ground cloth. This is your first line of defense against the damp, cold earth. Inside are your 2 thin wool blankets. You arrange them as best you can, creating a pitifully small pocket of potential warmth. This is your home, but you are not alone in this bed. You are about to become intimately acquainted with a host of tiny, unwelcome guests. The ground, the blankets, and your own unwashed body are a paradise for pests. The most common and persistent of these are lice. They are everywhere. They live in the seams of your clothes, in your hair, and in your bedding. You can feel them at night, a faint, maddening tickling sensation as they move across your skin. You'll occasionally see one of the other cowboys sitting slightly apart, picking them from his shirt and crushing them between his thumbnails with a satisfying tiny pop. It's a common, casual act of personal grooming. Then there are the ticks. These are more sinister. They burrow into your skin, often in places you'd rather not inspect too closely, and can carry diseases like tick fever, what we now know as Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which was often fatal. Part of your nightly routine becomes a quick, fumbling self-inspection in the dim light, feeling for any new unwelcome bumps. And of course, there are the ants, spiders, and the occasional scorpion looking for a warm place to spend the night. You learn to shake out your boots vigorously every morning before putting them on. A scorpion sting in the foot, miles from any real help, is a serious problem. One of the old cowboy tricks is to lay your rope in a circle on the ground around your bedroll. There's a persistent belief that snakes and scorpions won't cross a horse-hire rope. Whether it actually works is a subject of campfire debate, but you do it anyway. It's a small ritual that provides a sliver of psychological comfort in a world full of real threats. This brings us to a particularly unpleasant and rarely discussed aspect of cowboy bedding: the greyback. This was the charming nickname given to body lice. They were so common that they were considered a fact of life, not a sign of poor hygiene, because everyone had poor hygiene. Cowboys would sometimes try to get rid of them during one of their rare laundry days by boiling their clothes, but the lice would inevitably return, reinfesting from the shared bedding and close quarters of the drive. A strange bit of folklore surrounded them. Some believed that if a man was sick with a fever, and his greyback suddenly abandoned him, it was a sure sign he was about to die. They were, in a twisted way, seen as companions. The physical discomfort is immense. The ground is never as flat as it looks. A small rock you missed becomes a boulder digging into your hip by midnight. The temperature on the plains can swing wildly. You might fall asleep sweating, only to wake up shivering uncontrollably a few hours before dawn, the dew having soaked through your canvas. You pull the scratchy wool blankets up to your chin, curling into a tight ball for warmth. Historians are still trying to understand the long-term health consequences of these sleeping conditions. Chronic back pain, arthritis, and respiratory issues from the constant damp and cold were likely rampant among former cowboys. But these are the kinds of ailments that don't show up in the dramatic stories of the West. They are the quiet, attritional costs of a life lived on the ground. The common health problems that were so universal they were never even recorded as remarkable. You lie there, wrapped in your filthy blankets, listening to the night sounds. You can feel the phantom itch of lice on your scalp. You try to shift your body to a more comfortable position on the hard ground. A futile effort. You stare up at the sky, a breathtaking canopy of stars more brilliant and numerous than you could have ever imagined. It's a moment of profound, stark contrast. You are living in a state of incredible filth and discomfort, yet you are witness to this celestial, pristine beauty. You close your eyes, exhaustion finally winning the battle against the itching and the cold. You are not just sleeping on the ground, you are sleeping with it, becoming part of its ecosystem of dirt, insects, and dampness. The romantic image of the cowboy sleeping peacefully under the stars conveniently amidst his tiny, crawling bedfellows. Your dreams are a restless jumble of dust cattle, and the constant, low-level irritation of a world that is always biting you. There comes a moment in every person's day, a biological imperative that cannot be ignored. Back in the settled world, this is a private, mundane affair. Out here, on the sprawling, featureless prairie, it is a public and profoundly awkward undertaking. The concept of a restroom is a distant, luxurious memory. The entire Great Plains is your toilet, a fact that is both liberating and deeply disconcerting. There is no privacy. You are in the constant company of a dozen other men and 2,000 cattle. The landscape is mostly flat, offering little in the way of cover. A lone bush or a small depression in the ground becomes a highly sought-after piece of real estate. When nature calls during the day's ride, you have to be strategic. You might ride a little ahead of the herd or fall far behind, find a shallow gully or a patch of tall grass, and conduct your business as quickly as possible, always keeping one eye on the cattle and the other on your fellow riders. The etiquette is unspoken but universally understood. You don't make eye contact. You pretend not to notice the man dismounting 100 yards away and squatting awkwardly in the grass. It's a collective, silent agreement to grant each other a sliver of dignity in a situation that has none. The sanitation or complete lack thereof is staggering. There is no toilet paper. This is a luxury you haven't even thought to miss yet. Instead, you make do with what the environment provides. Smooth stones, broad leaves if you can find any, and corn cobs saved from a previous meal were all common substitutes. It's a rough and deeply unhygienic process. Hand washing is, of course, out of the question. You might wipe your hands on your dusty pants or a clump of grass, and that's the end of it. A few hours later, you'll be eating your dinner with those same hands. This is, as you can imagine, a primary vector for disease. Fecal oil contamination was a constant, invisible threat. A cowboy relieves himself too close to the camp's water source, or fails to clean his hands adequately before a meal, and suddenly half the outfit is struck down with debilitating diarrhea and stomach cramps, a condition grimly known as the trots of the flocks. It was miserable, dehydrating, and in the harsh environment of the trail, it could be deadly. Here we encounter a truly bizarre and specific piece of frontier lore, the fear of outhouse snakes. Even in the rare instances where you might encounter a primitive outhouse at a ranch or a small way station, they were terrifying places. These were often just a shallow pit with a wooden seat over them, and they were notorious for attracting snakes, spiders, and bounded of men being bitten in a very vulnerable position by a rattlesnake seeking shade in the pit below. This led to the common practice of always poking a stick down the hole before sitting down. It's a small, almost comical detail that reveals a world of constant, low-level paranoia. At the main camp, a slightly more formal system develops. The latrine is simply a designated area, usually a trench dug a respectable distance downwind from the main campfire and the chuck wagon. It's a simple, practical measure to keep the immediate living area from becoming a complete cesspool. But respectable distance is a relative term, and on a hot day with a shifting wind, the whole camp gets an unpleasant reminder of its location. The environmental impact of this practice is something rarely considered. A cattle drive was a moving city of men and animals, and it left a trail of waste in its wake. The sheer amount of human and animal excrement deposited across the plains was immense. While much of it was organic and would eventually break down, in the short term, it contaminated water sources and created a trail of filth that stretched for hundreds of miles. Historians who specialize in environmental history are beginning to study this. They analyze soil samples and historical accounts to map the ecological footprint of these massive drives. Was the introduction of so much concentrated waste a factor in the changing composition of prairie grasses? Did it create hot spots for certain types of bacteria that affected local wildlife? The academic term for this is anthropogenic impact, a fancy way of saying the mess humans leave behind. It's a field of study that reminds us that even the most natural-seeming parts of history had a dirty, man-made component. You learn the routine quickly. You learn to be fast. You learn to be discreet. You learn to not think too hard about the process. You find a spot, do your business, and get back in the saddle as if nothing happened. It becomes just another part of the day, another small indignity you absorb into your being. But it's also a constant, nagging reminder of how far you are from civilization. It's in these small, private moments of public necessity that the romantic myth of the cowboy truly crumbles, replaced by the simple, smelly reality of a man trying to get by in a world without walls. Weeks have now bled into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. The concept of days of the week has become meaningless. Time is measured in miles covered and rivers crossed. And all this time, your outfit is no longer a collection of garments, it is a second skin, a stiff, greasy shell that has become a part of you. That sturdy wool garment, which once felt scratchy in form, has now molded to the shape of your torso. It is saturated with a complex patina of sweat, dirt, dust, and grease. The color is a uniform, nondescript brownish gray, the original hue long forgotten. If you were to take it off a rare and unpleasant event, it could probably stand up on its own. It smells. Oh, how it smells! It's a rich, sour, animalistic odor, the smell of unremitting labor. But you no longer notice it, any more than you notice the air you breathe. Your pants are even worse. The heavy den are more canvas is stiff with grime. There are dark, greasy patches on the thighs from wiping your hands after eating or cleaning a tool. The knees are worn thin, and the seat is polished to a strange sheen from constant contact with the leather saddle. They are torn from thorny brush and patched with scraps of whatever was available, a piece of an old flour sack, maybe some spare canvas. The patches are crudely stitched on with a needle and thread from the cook's chuck box. Your pants are a living document of your journey, a roadmap of every scrape and spill. Underneath it all, the chafing is a constant, dull reality. The combination of sweat, dirt, and rough fabric creates a relentless friction against your skin. Raw, reed patches develop in your armpits, on your inner thighs, and around your waist. Sometimes these sores break open and bleed, sticking to your clothes in a painful, unhygienic bond. You try to adjust, to sit differently in the saddle, but there's no real relief. This brings us to a peculiar, almost unbelievable detail of trail life: the seasoning of new clothes. When a cowboy was lucky enough to get a new pair of denim jeans, he wouldn't just put them on. They were stiff as a board, dyed with a dark, rye indigo that would rub off on everything. The breaking in process was an art form. Some cowboys would put on their new jeans and ghost, and in the nearest river or cattle trough, soaking them completely. Then, they would wear them all day as they dried, allowing the fabric to shrink and mold perfectly to their body shape. Others had a more organic method. They would simply start wearing them, and the gradual accumulation of sweat, horsehair, and dirt would soften the fabric over a period of weeks. A new garment was a sign of a green, and a truly seasoned cowboy wore clothes that looked like they had been through a war. Your skin itself has become a canvas of filth. A permanent layer of dust and dried sweat clogs your pores. Your hands are the worst. They are calloused, cracked, and stained with dirt, tobacco, and horse grime. Your fingernails are permanently rimmed with black. You use these hands to eat, to rub your eyes, to handle everything. The idea of washing them before a meal is a distant, absurd fantasy. The accumulation of dirt was so total that it had its own folklore. Some cowboys swore that this layer of grime, this trail dust, was protective. It was said to ward off sunburn and insects. In a way, they weren't entirely wrong. A thick layer of dirt can physically block UV rays and might make you a less appealing target for a mosquito. This is another example of a vernacular health belief, a pre-scientific attempt to rationalize and find benefit in an unavoidable reality. The academic field of medical anthropology studies how different cultures create these belief systems to cope with their environment. The cowboys' belief in the healthy nature of dirt is a classic case study. Historians are still debating the precise psychological effects of living in such a state. Did this constant, intimate relationship with filth break a man's spirit? Or did it forge a unique kind of resilience? Did the surrender to dirt create a sense of freedom from the fussy conventions of society? Or did it create a deep-seated craving for the simple pleasure of being clean? It was likely a bit of both. For some, it was a source of pride, a visible testament to their toughness. It was a silent burden, a constant reminder of their lowly status. You sit by the fire, picking at a loose thread on your patched trousers. You catch a whiff of your own ripe aroma and feel a flicker of something. Is it disgust or just acceptance? You look at the other men, their faces streaked with dirt, their clothes as battered as yours. You are a tribe of the unwashed. The dirt is your uniform, your camouflage, your old clean clothes, your identity. Your old self, the person who valued clean clothes and a nightly wash, seems like a stranger from another lifetime. That person is gone, buried under layers of prairie dust and hardened by the sun. In his place is this new creature, this cowboy who wears his filth like a badge of honor, or perhaps a scar. The idea of a laundry day on a cattle drive is almost a contradiction in terms. It was an incredibly rare event, a luxury afforded only by a perfect alignment of circumstances, a day of rest for the herd, a nearby river with reasonably clear water, and a hot, sunny sky for drying. This might happen once in a month-long journey, almost a strange and almost ceremonial occasion. You've been on the trail for what feels like an eternity. Your clothes have achieved a state of filth so profound that they have a life of their own. Then one afternoon, the trail boss announces that you've made good time and the herd needs a day to graze and rest before a long, dry stretch ahead. You've camped by a slow-moving but relatively clean river. The word goes out it's a wash day. A palpable sense of excitement, mixed with a certain awkwardness, ripples through the camp. The first challenge is the act of undressing. Peeling off your stiff, greasy clothes in the open air, surrounded by your fellow cowboys, is a strangely vulnerable moment. Your skin, which has not seen direct sunlight in weeks, is pale and starkly white compared to your sun-beaten face and hands. You are covered in a constellation of sores, insect bites and rashes. You see that the other men are in the same condition. It's a moment of shared, unglamorous humanity. You take your single set of clothes down to the riverbank. There is no soap. Soap was a heavy, precious commodity reserved for the cook's use, if he had any at all. You find a large, flat rock and wade into the cool water. First, you attempt to wash yourself. You splash water on your body, rubbing furiously with your hands, trying to scrub away weeks of accumulated grime. The water around you turns a muddy brown. You can't remember the last time you were fully submerged in water. It feels both wonderful and strangely alien. Then you turn to your clothes. You lay your shirt and pants on the rock and beat them with another smaller rock. You pound and thrash the fabric, trying to physically knock the dirt out of the fibers. You swish them in the river, the current carrying away clouds of filth. You repeat the process over and over, pounding, rinsing and wringing. It's a surprisingly strenuous task. Your wool shirt sheds dirt and grime but also loose fibers, slowly disintegrating with each wash. Herein lies a curious and disgusting little piece of trail laundry lore. Some cowboys, in an attempt to replicate the chemical action of soap, would use yucca root if it was available. The root of the yucca plant, when crushed, produces a natural saponin, a soothing agent. But a more common and far more stomach-turning method was the use of urine. Urea, a chemical compound in urine, breaks down into ammonia, which has powerful cleaning properties. It's an ancient cleaning technique used by cultures all over the world. A cowboy might collect his urine in a bucket, soak his clothes in it for a while, and then rinse them thoroughly in the river. It was surprisingly effective at cutting through grease, but the thought of it is enough to make you shudder. Once you've beaten and rinsed your clothes to a state of less filthy, you spread them out on bushes or lay them on hot rocks to dry in the sun. The intense sunlight of the plains acted as a natural disinfectant, the UV rays killing some of the bacteria and lice that had taken up residence in the fabric. As your clothes dry, you and the other cowboys lounge around the riverbank, a strange gathering of pale, skinny figures in the vast wilderness. It's a rare moment of communal leisure. The results of your laundry efforts are mixed. Your clothes are no longer stiff with dirt, but they are far from clean. They are now a faded, washed-out version of their former selves, stained and smelling faintly of damp wool and river mud. But when you put them back on, the sensation is extraordinary. The feeling of fabric that is merely damp, rather than saturated with greasy sweat, is a forgotten luxury. Historians and museum curators who handle authentic 19th century cowboy clothing often note the extreme wear and tear on these garments. The fabric is often incredibly thin with multiple, crude patches. They analyze the fibers under a microscope and find embedded particles of sand, pollen, and organic matter. A microscopic history of the trail. The academic debate here revolves around preservation. Was it the constant wear of these rare, harsh cleaning methods that caused the clothes to deteriorate so quickly? The evidence suggests it was a combination of both. The pounding with rocks and the harsh chemical action of primitive cleaning agents were brutal on the fibers. Each wash was a trade-off, a temporary state of relative cleanliness in exchange for shortening the life of your only outfit. Use it by the fire that evening, feeling scrubbed raw, feels sensitive and new. Your clothes are still damp in places, but they feel softer. The other men are in a similar state, a little quieter, a little more relaxed. This brief return to a semblance of cleanliness is a powerful psychological reset. It's a reminder that you are not just a creature of dirt and labor, but a human being who can, on rare occasions, feel the simple, profound pleasure of being clean. You know it won't last. Within a day, the dust and sweat will begin their relentless work of reclamation. But for now, in this moment, you feel almost civilized. You're now deep into the rhythm of the trail, a rhythm dictated by sun, sweat, and the slow, plodding movement of cattle. You've adapted to the physical filth in ways you never thought possible. But there's another, more insidious element. You're constantly battling the air itself. Not just the dust, but the smells, which people at the time believed were the direct cause of disease. This brings us to one of the most powerful and fundamentally wrong scientific ideas of the 19th century, the miasma theory. For thousands of years, long before anyone knew what a bacterium or a virus was, people connected bad smells with sickness. It seemed logical. Areas with foul-odor swamps, garbage dumps, open sewers, battlefields were also areas where disease was rampant. Therefore, the reasoning went, the disease must be carried in the smell itself, a poisonous vapor or miasma that rose from decaying organic matter. You and your fellow cowboys are devout, if unknowing, believers in this theory. It governs many of your daily habits and fears. You don't worry about washing your hands after using the makeshift latrine, because you can't see or smell any danger on them. But you do worry about the direction of the wind. The cook is careful to set up the camp upward from the latrine trench and, if possible, upward from the main herd of cattle. A breeze blowing from the wrong direction, carrying the stench of manure and waste, is considered not just unpleasant, but genuinely unhealthy. You see this theory in action in small ways every day. If a cow dies on the trail, its carcass is dragged far away from the camp, not just because it's unpleasant, but because the smell of its decay is thought to release a toxic miasma into the air. When you pass a stagnant, foul-smelling pond, you might hold your bandana over your nose, not just to block the odor, but in a genuine attempt to filter out the sickness in the air. This belief system creates a strange and paradoxical approach to hygiene. On one hand, you are living in a state of incredible personal filth, your body and clothes caked in dirt. On the other hand, you are highly attuned to the ambient smells of your environment, constantly on guard against invisible airborne threats. You might not think twice about drinking from a muddy, contaminated water source if it doesn't smell bad, but you would be deeply concerned about sleeping in a low-lying, damp area where the air feels heavy and smells of rot. Here's a specific and fascinating manifestation of this belief: the use of tobacco. Nearly every cowboy smokes or chews tobacco. It's partly for the nicotine, a small comfort and stimulant in a life of hardship. But it also serves another purpose. The strong smell of tobacco was thought to purify the air around a person, creating a protective cloud that could ward off miasmas, which was seen as a way of expelling bad humors and toxins from the body. The spitting in a saloon or the stained ground around a campfire wasn't just a sign of a bad habit, it was, in a way, a public health measure, a collective effort to fight airborne disease by creating a more powerful, healthier smell. The air inside any enclosed space was considered particularly dangerous. If you had to spend a night in a rare, crowded line shack or cabin, the first thing the cowboys would do is open all the windows, even on a cold night, to air the place out. The belief was that the breath of too many people sleeping in one room would create a concentration of toxic miasma. The idea of fresh air as a cure-all was paramount. Historians of science and medicine find the miasma theory fascinating because it was a completely wrong idea that occasionally led to the right outcomes. The theory prompted civic leaders in big cities like London and New York to build sanitation systems to get rid of the foul-smelling sewage. They were doing it to fight the smell, but in doing so they accidentally removed the source of cholera bacteria and saved countless lives. But the public health interventions it inspired were often right. This is a recurring theme in the history of science. Progress is not always a straight line from wrong to right. Sometimes it's a crooked path where a flawed model leads to a beneficial result. For you on the trail, this debate is academic. Your world is governed by your senses. Bad smell equals danger. You lie in your bedroll at night, the air smelling of sagebrush, dust and damp earth. It smells clean to you, healthy. You breathe it in deeply, believing it's a tonic for your weary body. You are unaware of the microscopic pathogens on your hands, on your plate, and in your water. Your greatest fears are directed at an enemy that doesn't exist, the poisonous vapor, while the real killers, the bacteria and viruses, go completely unnoticed. It's a profound, life-or-death misunderstanding played out every day under the vast, open skies of the West. You are navigating a world of invisible dangers, using a map that is almost entirely wrong. Sooner or later it happens. You wake up one morning not just tired but with a deep, throbbing ache in your joints. Your head pounds, and a wave of nausea rolls through your stomach. You are sick, on the cattle trail. There is no sick leave, no doctor's note, no place to recover. Sickness is a liability, a weakness that threatens not just you, but the entire outfit. Your first instinct is to hide it. You force yourself out of your bedroll, trying to move as if nothing is wrong. You swallow the bile rising in your throat and head for your horse. But the trail boss has a sixth sense for these things. He sees the pallor of your skin, the slight tremor in your hands. He asks you a single, direct question: you are ill, and there's no point in lying. You nod, admitting defeat. Now you enter the world of frontier medicine, a terrifying combination of folk remedies, rough pragmatism, and sheer guesswork. The chuck wagon, that mobile kitchen and pantry, is also the trail's pharmacy. The cook, by default, becomes the medic. His medical knowledge comes from a hodgepodge of old wives' tales, battlefield experience, and whatever he's gleaned from patent medicine almanacs. For your fever, the first and most common prescription is brought out a tin cup filled whiskey. Alcohol was the universal solvent for all ailments on the frontier. It was believed to burn out the fever, to thin the blood, and to restore a man's constitution. In reality, it was a painkiller and a sedative. It didn't cure anything, but it might make you feel a little better for a while, or at least care less about how miserable you felt. It also had the unfortunate side effect of causing dehydration, which was likely the last thing you needed. If the whiskey doesn't work, Cookie might move on to other remedies from his chuck box. He might have a tin of quinine powder, a genuinely effective treatment for malaria, but it was used as a general cure for any kind of fever. It was incredibly bitter, and you'd have to choke it down with a swig of water. He might also brew you a tea from some local herb he recognizes, like willow bark, which contains lycine, the natural precursor to aspirin. This was one of the few folk remedies that actually worked. For stomach troubles, the dreaded flux, the treatments were more dramatic. A common remedy was to administer a large dose of castor oil, a powerful laxative, in the belief that you needed to purge the sickness from your system. Another popular, and more pleasant, option was a concoction of boiled blackberry roots, which contain tannins that can help to settle an upset stomach. This brings us to a strange and specific medical belief of the era, the blue masked pill. This was a popular patent medicine. A small, bluish-gray pill. It was prescribed for a huge range of complaints, from constipation to depression. Its primary active ingredient, mercury. Patients were essentially being given small, regular doses of a potent neurotoxin. Cowboys would sometimes carry these pills in their bedrolls, swearing by their efficacy. It's a horrifying example of how a cure could often be far more dangerous than the disease. If your condition is more than a simple illness, if you have an injury, like a deep cut from a fall, or a broken bone, the situation becomes far more grim. The cook's surgical kit is rudimentary at best, a rusty knife, and maybe a small saw for amputations. For a deep cut, the standard procedure would be to pour whiskey directly into the wound as a disinfectant. It was excruciatingly painful and not particularly effective. The wound would be stitched up with a regular needle and thread, almost guaranteeing infection. Gangrene was a constant terror. A minor, unattended wound could quickly become infected, the flesh turning black and dying. The only treatment was amputation. The cook, fortified with a few shots of whiskey for his own nose, would give you the rest of the bottle as an anesthetic. Your friends would hold you down, and the cook would saw off the afflicted limb as quickly as he could. The stump would then be cauterized with a hot iron from the campfire to stop the bleeding. Agonizing procedure with a very low survival rate. Historians who study the medical history of the West are often working with very limited data. They piece together the story from personal diaries, letters at frontier forts. There's a persistent debate about the overall health of cowboys. Some argue that despite the poor hygiene and medicine, they were a self-selecting group of incredibly tough, healthy young men, and that the fresh air and physical labor kept them relatively free of the diseases plaguing crowded eastern cities. Others argue that this is a romantic myth, and that the trail was a meat grinder that left men broken, disabled, and suffering from chronic, untreated ailments. You lie in the back of the bouncing chuck wagon, a space cleared for you among the sacks of flour and beans. The whiskey has made your head swim, but the aches and chills remain. You are a burden. Every cowboy knows the cold calculus of the trail. The herd must keep moving. If you don't recover quickly, you could be left behind at the next ranch or settlement. You're padlocked to fend for yourself. Or worse, if you're in the middle of nowhere, you could be buried in a shallow grave marked by a simple wooden cross or a pile of stones. You close your eyes, the wagon jolting over the rough terrain. Your fate is now in the hands of a cook with a bottle of whiskey and a handful of questionable remedies. Survival has never felt so fragile. The days on the trail settle into a deceptive, monotonous rhythm: walk, eat, sleep, repeat. The cattle, lulled by the routine, move like a slow, placid river. You start to feel a sense of complacency, a dangerous feeling in this environment. And then, without warning, chaos erupts. It's the event that every cowboy fears most: a stampede. It can be triggered by anything: a sudden clap of thunder from a distant storm, the flash of lightning splitting the night sky, the yelp of a clumsy coyote, a greenhorn like you dropping a tin cup near the sleeping herd. Whatever the cause, the effect is instantaneous and terrifying. A single steer spooks, then another, and in a heartbeat, a wave of panic ripples through 2,000 cattle. The ground begins to tremble. A low rumble escalates into a deafening roar of hooves and panicked bellows. The herd is no longer a collection of animals, it has become a single, mindless entity, a thundering, unstoppable force of nature. Your training, such as it is, kicks in. There's no time for fear. You wheel your horse around, digging in your spurs, and gallop into the darkness. Your job, along with every other hand, is to get to the front of the herd, to the point, and try to turn the lead animals. The goal isn't to stop the stampede, that's impossible. The goal is to make the herd run in a circle, to mill them until they exhaust themselves, and the panic subsides. You are riding at a full, reckless gallop over unfamiliar terrain in pitch darkness. Your life depends entirely on the skill and sure-footedness of your horse. A gopher hole, a small ditch, a loose rock, any of these could send your horse stumbling, and you would be trampled into the earth in seconds. The air is thick with dust and the hot, panicked breath of the cattle. You can feel the vibration in your bones. Horns clack and scrape against each other, a sound like 1,000 knives being sharpened at once. You and the other riders yell and whoop, not out of excitement, but to make your presence known to the cattle, to let them know something is alongside them, guiding them. You ride hard, pushing the flank, trying to force the wave of bodies to turn. It's a battle of will and endurance between a dozen men on horseback and 100 tons of panicked beef. This is where you get a fresh and unwelcome coating of filth. As you ride alongside the stampeding animals, you are splattered with mud, grass, and a liberal amount of fresh, liquid manure flung into the air by the pounding hooves. It gets in your face, in your mouth, plastering your clothes with a foul-smelling new layer of grime. The smell of fierce sweat from the animals is pungent and thick in the air. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, you feel the tide begin to turn. The led steers, exhausted and hemmed in by the riders, begin to slow and arc into a circle. The rest of the herd follows, their momentum slowly dissipating as they are forced into an ever tighter milling circle. The roar subsides to a collection of nervous moans and bellows. The stampede is over. The aftermath is a scene of utter devastation. You and the other men are drenched in sweat and filth, your horses trembling unlathered. You spend the rest of the night and the next day combing the countryside, gathering the scattered cattle. Some will be lost for good. Others you will find miles away, grazing peacefully as if nothing happened. And some you will find dead, having fallen into a gully or broken a leg in the mad dash. One of the more bizarre and debated phenomena associated with stampeders is the crazy cattle. Old-time cowboys swore that some longhorn steers, after surviving a bad stampede, were never the same. They became perpetually nervous, spooky, and prone to starting another stampede at the slightest provocation. These crazy or outlaw steers were often shot by the trail boss, as they posed to greater risk to the rest of the herd. Modern animal behaviorists might explain this as a form of PTSD in livestock, but at the time it was just another mysterious and dangerous aspect of the trail. Historians are still trying to quantify the economic impact of stampeders. How much of the potential profit from a cattle drive was lost to these chaotic events? The numbers are hard to pin down. A trail boss's log might mention a run or a scare, but rarely would it detail the full extent of the losses. It was an accepted cost of doing business, a risk inherent in the industry. This has led to an academic debate. Was the romanticized image of the cowboy battling a stampede a way of glorifying and normalizing what was, in essence, a catastrophic failure of risk management? You ride back to camp, every muscle screaming in protest. You are covered in a new, foul layer of muck that makes your previous state of filth seem almost pristine. You don't even have the energy to try and wipe it off. You fall into your bedroll, too exhausted to eat, and collapse into a deep, dreamless sleep. The romantic image of the cowboy is of a man in control, a master of the wilderness. But in the face of a stampede, you learn the truth. You are not in control. You are a tiny, fragile figure, desperately trying to nudge a force of nature, getting covered in its filth for your troubles. It's a humbling and deeply dirty lesson. Months have passed. The landscape has slowly changed from the scrubby plains of Texas to the greener, rolling hills of Kansas. The air feels different, a little less dry, a little more humid. You've crossed the Red River, the Cimarron, and a dozen other muddy waterways. You, and the men around you, are no longer the greenhorns who left the end of the railroad line. You are gaunt, leathery, and seasoned by the trail. You are also filthier than you have ever been in your life. Then, one afternoon, you smell it. It's a strange, complex odor that cuts through the familiar scent of cattle and dust. It's the smell of coal smoke, of too many people, of cooking fires, and of waste. It's the smell of civilization, or at least the frontier's version of it. You have arrived at a cow town. The sight of it, rising from the plains, is both thrilling and deeply underwhelming. It's not the bustling metropolis you might have imagined. It's a raw, chaotic cluster of unpainted wooden buildings, most of them a single story high, lining a wide, rutted strip of dirt that calls itself a street. Places like Abilene, Dodge City, or Ellsworth. They were little more than shipping depots, built for the singular purpose of connecting Texas cattle to eastern markets via the newly laid railroad tracks. As you get closer, the scale of the operation becomes clear. The town is surrounded by vast holding pens, a sea of cattle kicking up a permanent haze of dust. The railroad tracks glint in the sun, with long lines of cattle cars waiting to be loaded. The entire economy, the entire existence of this place, is centered on the buying, selling, and shipping of the very animals you have just spent months of your life moving. The trail boss leads the herd to a designated grazing area outside of town, where they will be held and counted before being sold. Your job is finally, mercifully, over. The trail boss rides into town to meet with the cattle brokers, and a palpable sense of anticlimactic relief settles over you and the other hands. Now comes the moment you have been dreaming about for 1,000 dusty miles, getting paid. The trail boss returns with a bag of coins. He calls each man forward, one by one, and counts out his wages. 3, maybe for months of work, 90, maybe $120. It feels like a fortune. It's more money than you have ever held in your hand at one time. The heavy silver dollars weigh down your pockets, a tangible reward for all the hardship. You look at the town, a beacon of promise on the horizon. It represents everything you've been deprived of for months: a roof over your head, a real bed, a hot meal that isn't beans, and most importantly, a bath. The desire for these simple human comforts is a physical ache. You can almost feel the sensation of hot water, the taste of fresh bread, the softness of a mattress. But, as you and the other cowboys prepare to ride into town, you are confronted with an uncomfortable truth. You stink. You are not just dirty, you are offensively, profoundly filthy. Your clothes are stiff with grime and manure. Your hair is matted with sweat and dust. Your body odor is a potent, walking announcement of your recent profession. You are a walking, talking biohazard. This is a little-known fact that shatters the myth of the heroic cowboy riding into town to save the day. The reality is, the townsfolk were often disgusted by the cowboys. They saw them not as heroes, but as a necessary evil, a seasonal influx of rough, ungyphionic men who brought money, but also trouble and a terrible smell. There was a deep social and sensory divide between the relatively settled people of the town and the transient, trail-worn cowboys. Historians who study the social dynamics of these cow towns point to this as a major source of conflict. The famous gunfights and saloon brawls were not just about high-stakes poker games or macho posturing. They were often rooted in a deeper class and cultural clash. The town marshals like Wyatt Earp or Wild Bill Hickok were not just policing crime, they were enforcing a certain standard of civic order, a standard that the cowboys, fresh off the trail, often violated with their very presence. The academic term for this is civic friction, the tension that arises when a stable community has to interact with a large, transient, and culturally different population. You don't know any of this academic theory. You just know that you have money in your pocket and a powerful urge to spend it. You and a few of your pardiers swing into your saddles, your horses as weary as you are, and start the short ride into town. The anticipation is electric. You are about to collide with civilization. You have no idea that civilization might not be all that happy to see you. You are a celebrated figure in the mythology of the West, but as you ride down that dusty main street, the first thing people notice about you is not your rugged heroism, but your overwhelming, eye-watering stench. Welcome to town. Please, for the love of God, find a bathish. Your first steps into the cow town are a sensory assault. After months in the vast, open quiet of the prairie, the noise is overwhelming. pianos jangling from a dozen saloons, the shouts of merchants, the rumble of wagons, the sharp clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the whistle of a steam engine. It's a cacophony of human industry that feels both exciting and jarring. But the most immediate and visceral sensation is what's under your feet. The main street is not paved. It's not even gravel. It is a wide, deep trough of mud and filth. Decades before the invention of municipal sanitation systems, the streets of these frontier towns were a nightmare. They were a churned-up morass of dirt, water, and waste. All the garbage from the town's businesses and residents gets thrown directly into the street. Food scraps, broken bottles, old clothes, anything and everything. The town's animals, horses, mules, oxen, dogs, and pigs roam freely, adding their own contributions to the mix. The spit and nest from the saloons, filled with tobacco juice, phlegm, and cigar butts, are often emptied right out the front door or from a second-story window. When it rains, the street transforms into a thick, sucking quagmire of primordial ooze, sometimes deep enough to swallow a wagon wheel or a small child. When it's dry, the filth desiccates into a fine, foul-smelling dust that is kicked up by every gust of wind and passing horse. You try to navigate this obstacle course. There are often narrow wooden boardwalks running in front of the buildings, elevated a foot or two above the muck. But even these are treacherous, often slick with mud and littered with trash. You step off the boardwalk to cross the street, and your boots sink into a thick, foul-smelling slurry. The smell is ripe and complex wet earth, manure, rotting garbage, and stale beer, all baking under the prairie sun. This is the perfect breeding ground for disease. The water that pools in the street seeps into the ground, contaminating the shallow wells from which the townspeople get their drinking water. This is how a single case of cholera or typhoid, brought in by a new arrival, could explode into a full-blown epidemic, sweeping through the town and killing dozens. The connection between the filth in the street and the sickness in the homes was not fully understood, but people knew enough to be wary. A strange and specific feature you notice are the street crossings. At major intersections there might be a few large, flat stones placed as stepping stones or sometimes a narrow plank laid across the worst of the muck. Navigating these required a certain amount of balance and agility. A misstep could land you ankle-deep in a truly disgusting mess. The town's respectable ladies with their long skirts had a particularly difficult time having to lift their hems high, revealing their ankles, a slightly scandalous act at the time to avoid dragging their dresses through the filth. You finally make it to the other side of the street, your boots several pounds heavier and infinitely more disgusting. You scrape them as best you can on the edge of the boardwalk, a futile gesture. You are headed for your first destination, a place that promises a temporary reprieve from the grime you've been living in and the grime you've just walked through the bathish. Historians who specialize in urban development on the frontier see these streets as a physical manifestation of the town's character. They were temporary, chaotic, and built for expediency, not longevity or comfort. There was no civic budget for things like paving or sewage systems. All the energy and capital were focused on the commercial enterprises, the saloons, the general stores, the hotels, and the brothels. The public spaces were an afterthought, on neglected commons that reflected the transient, boom and bust nature of the town itself. There is a whole academic field called garbology which studies societies through their waste, and a 19th century Cowtown Street would be a treasure trove for a historical garbo, log ist. As you stand on the boardwalk, looking down the long, filthy thoroughfare, the romantic image of a clean, heroic Main Street showdown evaporates. Any gunfight here would involve the participants slipping and sliding in the muck, their dramatic fall potentially landing them in a pile of horse manure and rotting cabbage. It's a far cry from the sanitized Hollywood version. The West wasn't just wild, it was deeply, profoundly, and inescapable dirty, right down to the very ground it was built on. You and your trail filth have arrived in a town that is, in its own way, just as foul. You feel right at home. Your first priority in this chaotic cowtown is to wash away the trail. You and your friends, clutching your hard-earned pay, seek out the establishment that promises this miraculous transformation, the public bathish. It's usually attached to a barber shop, and a simple painted sign announces its purpose: baths, 25 cents. It seems like a small price to pay for salvation. You step inside, and the air is thick with the unfamiliar and luxurious smells of steam, cheap soap, and bay rum tonic from the barber's chair. It's a stark contrast to the stench of the street and your own body. The proprietor, often the barber himself, looks you and your filthy companions up and down with a practiced, weary expression. He has seen your kind 1,000 times. He takes your quarter and points you toward a small, private stall in the back. The private stall is usually just a small cubicle, sectioned off with a rough wooden partition and a grimy canvas curtain for a door. Inside is your prize, a large copper-lined or tin bathtub. It's a thing of beauty. Next to it sits a bucket of cold water and a bucket of hot water, heated on a stove in the back room. You are given a small, thin towel and a sliver of harsh, lye-based soap. It's the height of luxury. You strip off your disgusting clothes, dropping them in a foul heap in the corner. You pour the hot and cold water into the tub, mixing it to a temperature that feels like heaven on your skin. You sink into the water, a wave of pure, unadulterated pleasure washing over you. The feeling of the water enveloping your body is so foreign and so wonderful that you just sit there for a moment, letting the grime of months on the trail begin to dissolve. The water around you immediately turns a deep, opaque brown. It's a shocking testament to the sheer amount of dirt you are carrying. You take the soap and begin to scrub. You scrub with a religious fervor, scraping away layers of dead skin, sweat, and prairie dust. The soap is harsh and stings your various sores and rashes, but it's a cleansing pain. You wash your hair, working up a lather for the first time in months, and watch as a river of filth runs down your face. But now we come to the rather disgusting reality behind this seemingly luxurious experience. You are not the first person to use this water. Water was a precious commodity in these towns. It had to be hauled by hand from a well or a river and then heated, a labor-intensive process. To conserve both water and fuel, a bathhouse owner would use the same tub of water for multiple customers. The first man of the day got a clean bath. The second man got his slightly used water, topped off with a bit of fresh hot water. By the time the fifth or sixth customer came along, the water was a lukewarm, greasy, human soup. As a cowboy fresh off the trail and likely at the end of the day's line, you are almost certainly getting the dregs. You are bathing in the diluted filth of several other men. It's a fact you try not to think about too hard. Compared to your previous condition, this shared dirty water still feels like a massive upgrade. This practice of using communal bathwater was common not just on the frontier, but in cities across America and Europe at the time. It's a stomach-churning reminder of how different historical standards of cleanliness were. After you're soaked, you face a new dilemma. Your old clothes are so foul that putting them back on feels like a crime against your newly cleaned skin. This is where the town's merchants come in. Many bathhouses had a deal with the local general store. A man from the store would come and take your old clothes, leaving you with a fresh set of town clothes, a simple cotton shirt, new trousers, and maybe even a new pair of socks. The cost of these new clothes would be deducted from your pay, often at a significant markup. Your old clothes weren't thrown away. They would be subjected to a harsh cleaning process likely involving boiling and then sold secondhand to the next wave of poor, desperate greenhorns. It was a closed, highly profitable economic loop. Historians who study the economics of the West point to this as a classic example of the company town model, even in a seemingly free market environment. The cowboys, with a pocket full of cash and a desperate need for goods and services, were a captive market. The trail boss, the saloon owner, the hotel keeper, the merchant, they all worked in a loose symbiosis to extract as much of that hard-earned cattle money from you as possible before you could leave town. Your first bath was not just a cleansing ritual, it was your entry point into the town's relentless economic machine. You step out of the bathhouse a new man. You are clean, dressed in fresh clothes, and ready for whatever the town has to offer. The feeling is intoxicating. You have shed your trail identity and put on a new one. But the back of your mind can't shake the image of that murky, brown bathwater. It's a perfect metaphor for the cowtown itself. On the surface, it offers cleansing uncivilization, but just beneath, there's a shared, murky layer of filth you'd rather not think about. Now that you are clean, or at least cleaner and dressed in your new town clothes, your next stop is the barbershop. It's time to deal with the matted, overgrown mess on your head and face. The barbershop in a cow town was more than just a place for a haircut and a shave. It was a social hub, a male sanctuary, and rather alarmingly, a center for minor medical procedures. You walk into the shop, which is often the same establishment as the bathish. The barber, a man with a steady hand and a talkative nature, presides over his domain. The place is filled with the scent of bay rum, talcum powder, and hair tonic. You settle into the barber's chair, a magnificent piece of engineering with leather upholstery and ornate ironwork. It feels like a throne. First comes the haircut. The barber takes his scissors and combs and goes to work on the tangled nest on your head. He clips and snips, and great hanks of dusty, greasy hair fall to the floor. It's a strangely satisfying feeling of physical lightening. He might comment on the wildness of your hair, a backhanded compliment to your rugged trail life. Next is the shave, the ultimate symbol of returning to civilization. A hot towel is wrapped around your face, the steam softening your rough beard and opening your pores. It's incredibly relaxing, a moment of pure pampering. Then, the barber lathers your face with a thick, foamy cream, using a brush made of badger hair. Finally, he takes out his primary tool, the straight razor. He straps it on a long leather strap, the blade flashing in the light. He then proceeds to scrape away weeks of beard with a series of precise, practiced strokes. You have to put an immense amount of trust in this man not to slit your throat. But here's where the hygiene, once again, takes a terrifying turn. The concept of sterilizing tools between customers was completely alien. The barber might wipe his razor on a cloth or swish it in a cup of water, but that was it. The same razor that just shaved the man before you, with his own unique collection of skin conditions and potential infections, is now being drawn across your own vulnerable skin. Small nicks and cuts were common, and these open wounds were a direct gateway for bacteria. A simple shave could easily lead to a nasty skin infection, a condition known as barber's itch, a type of folliculitis. The tools were a source of grim fascination. The barber's collection of scissors, razors, and tonics was his pride and joy. But his drawer also contained other, more alarming instruments: lancets for bloodletting, forceps for pulling teeth, and probes for exploring wounds. This is a bizarre and often overlooked fact in many frontier towns without a dedicated doctor. The barber was also the surgeon and the dentist. His sign might read barber surgeon. He was the man you went to for lancing a boil, stitching a cut, or even a minor amputation. His anatomical knowledge was usually minimal, based on a combination of folk wisdom and dry experience. This combination of professions has ancient roots, stretching back to medieval Europe, where barber surgeons were a recognized guild. The red and white striped barber pole is a relic of this history. The red represents blood, and the white represents bandages, symbolizing the two main services offered: haircutting and bloodletting. So, while you're getting your shave, the man in the chair next to you might be getting a rotten tooth pulled. The barber would simply wipe his hands on his apron, switch from his razor to a pair of pliers, and go to work. The sounds were not for the faint of heart. Historians debate the efficacy and safety of these barber surgeons. Were they dangerous quacks who did more harm than good, or were they providing a necessary service in a world with no other options? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. They weren't trained in their methods weren't Giffinic, but they were often the only medical resource available. Their existence speaks to the immense gap in professional services on the frontier. The development of professionalized medicine and the licensing of doctors was a slow process that had not yet reached these remote corners of the country. You finally emerge from the barbershop, your hair neatly trimmed, your face smooth and smelling of bay rum. You feel like a new person, civilized and respectable. You run your hand over your smooth chin, a gesture that feels completely alien. You look at your reflection in the shop window and barely recognize the clean-shaven young man staring back. You have successfully purchased the appearance of civilization. You just have to hope you didn't also purchase a bacterial infection along with your shave. Your transformation from trail-worn vagabond to civilized townsman is nearly complete. You've bathed and you've had a shave. But there might be one more nagging problem, a dull, throbbing ache in your jaw that has been your unwelcome companion for the last 100 miles. A bad tooth. On the trail, You just had to endure it. In town, you have options, and none of them are good. You ask around for a dentist, and people laugh. A dedicated, professional dentist was a rarity found only in large, established cities. In a rough-and-tumble cow town, dental care was a brutal, ad hoc affair handled by whoever had the strongest stomach and the right tools. Your dentist was likely to be the town blacksmith. You walked down the street, away from the saloons and general stores, toward the rhythmic clang of a hammer on steel. The blacksmith shop is a dark, cavernous space, filled with the heat and smoke of the forge. The blacksmith himself is a mountain of a man, his arms thick with muscle, his face and clothes permanently stained with soot. He is a master of shaping iron, not healing human ailments, but in the twisted logic of the frontier, his skills were considered transferable. He had the strength to pull, and he owned a variety of pliers. That was a good enough resume. You explain your problem, pointing to the offending molar. The blacksmith wipes his greasy hands on his leather apron, looks into your mouth with a grunt, and pronounces his diagnosis has got to come out. There is no discussion of fillings, crowns, or saving the tooth. Extraction was the one-size-fits-all solution for every dental problem, from a simple cavity to a gum infection. The procedure is swift, brutal, and utterly terrifying. Anesthesia consists of a large swig of whiskey from a bottle the blacksmith keeps for medicinal purposes. He might offer you the bottle to take a long pull yourself. It doesn't dull the pain so much as it dulls your ability to fight back. Then he selects his tool. He doesn't have delicate, specialized dental forceps. He has the tools of his trade, a grimy assortment of iron pliers, tongs, and pincers, designed for pulling nails and shaping horseshoes. He selects a pair that looks about the right size. There is no sterilization. The pliers he is about to put in your mouth were likely used to pull a bent nail out of a hoof just an hour ago. You are told to sit on a low stool or a wooden crate. There is no reclining chair, no gentle bedside manner. The blacksmith's assistant, if he has one, might be called over to hold your head and shoulders. The blacksmith forces your mouth open, clamps the iron pliers onto your tooth, and pulls. It is a moment of pure, white-hot agony. He twists and yanks, leveraging his immense strength. You can hear the sickening crunch of the root breaking, the tearing of gum tissue. It is not a clean, surgical extraction. It is a wrestling match between the blacksmith and your jawbone. Finally, with a great heave, the tooth comes free, a triumphant, bloody trophy. The blacksmith holds it up for your inspection, a triumphant, bloody trophy. He then tells you to rinse your mouth out with more whiskey, the alcohol searing the raw, open wound. He might stuff a bit of cotton or cloth into the bleeding socket. And that's it. The procedure is over. The cost is maybe 50 cents. This brings us to a particularly gruesome detail of frontier dentistry, the tooth key. Before pliers became the tool of choice, a common instrument for extraction was the tooth key. It was a metal tool with a claw at the end that was hooked over the tooth. The handle was then turned like a key in a lock, which would hopefully lever the tooth out of its socket. It was notoriously clumsy and often resulted in breaking the tooth, breaking the jaw, or taking out a chunk of the jawbone along with the tooth. It was an instrument of torture that was, thankfully, falling out of favor by the time of the great cattle drives. You stumble out of the blacksmith shop, your mouth full of blood and the fiery taste of cheap whiskey. The dull ache of the bad tooth has been replaced by the sharp, profound agony of the extraction. But in a strange way, you feel a sense of relief. The source of the chronic pain is gone. You have faced the ordeal and survived. Historians studying the history of public health point to dental hygiene as a major, often overlooked, aspect of overall well-being. The chronic infections and pain from untreated dental problems were a constant drain on people's health and productivity. The brutal methods of the blacksmith dentist, while horrifying by modern standards, were a desperate response to a widespread and serious health crisis. The debate among academics is whether this kind of treatment caused more problems like serious infections from unhygienic tools than it solved. You lean against a wall, spitting a mouthful of blood into the filthy street. Your jaw will ache for days. You will live on soft foods and whiskey for a while. But you have participated in another rite of passage of frontier life. You have faced down the blacksmith's pliers. Your smile is now a little less complete, a new gap in your teeth, a permanent souvenir of your time in a cow town. Your transformation is complete. You are bathed, shaved, and your dental issues have been violently resolved. With the rest of your pay jingling in your pocket, there is only one logical destination: the saloon. The saloon was the gravitational center of the cow town, its social and commercial heart. It was a place of business, a place of leisure, and more often than not, a place where your hard-earned money went to die. You push through the swinging doors and are hit by a wave of sensory information. The air is a thick fog of tobacco smoke so dense it stings your newly cleaned eyes. The smell is a potent cocktail of stale beer, cheap whiskey, sweat, and unwashed bodies, an aroma you are intimately familiar with, but it's more concentrated here. A tinny-sounding piano in the corner is being hammered on by a musician of questionable talent, providing a relentlessly cheerful soundtrack to the general grime. The place is packed. You see your fellow cowboys, their clean faces already starting to look a little flushed. There are also townsfolk, merchants, gamblers in slightly fancier clothes, and a few rough-looking characters who seem to be a permanent fixture of the establishment. You shoulder your way to the bar, a long plank of wood, often ornately carved but sticky to the touch from countless spilled drinks. You slap a coin on the bar and order a whiskey. The bartender, a man who has seen it all and is impressed by nothing, slides a small, thick-bottomed glass in front of you, along with the bottle. You pour your own drink. The whiskey is raw and fiery, tasting of grain and regret. It burns all the way down. You look down at the floor, and you notice it's covered in a thick layer of sawdust. This wasn't for rustic aesthetic. It was a practical solution for absorbing the sheer volume of liquids that ended up on the floor: spilled beer, rainwater tracked in from the muddy street, and most disgustingly, the copious amounts of tobacco spit. Chewing tobacco was ubiquitous, and while there were brass spit nests, or gobble ones, scattered around, their aim was often poor. And at the end of the night, it would be swept out and replaced, a primitive and foul form of floor cleaning. Now let's talk about the drinkware. You might be horrified to learn about the community cup. In some less reputable establishments, or during busy times, a bartender would simply give the used glass a quick swish in a bucket of murky, stagnant water, often called the slop bucket, and then refill it for the next person. The idea was that the high alcohol content of the whiskey would kill any germs. This was, of course, completely wrong. It was a highly efficient way to transmit diseases like tuberculosis, influenza, and the common cold. Even in better saloons, your clean glass was likely washed in cold, greasy water with no soap. The centerpiece of many saloons was the free lunch. This was a clever marketing tactic to keep you drinking. At the end of the bar, there would be a spread of food available to anyone who bought a drink. It sounds great, but the quality was dubious at best. It usually consisted of heavily salted items designed to make you thirsty: crackers, pretzels, pickled eggs, dried herring, and slabs of salty ham or beef. And the unwashed hands of every patron who reached in for a snack, it was a buffet of bacteria. Historians and sociologists who study these spaces see the saloon as a complex social institution. It was one of the few places on the frontier where different classes and ethnic groups mixed, albeit often uneasily. It was a place for information exchange, where news was shared and business deals were made. But it was also an engine of social problems, fueling alcoholism, gambling addiction, and violence. There's a debate about whether saloons were a civilizing force, providing a structured social outlet in a chaotic world, or a destabilizing one, amplifying the worst impulses of a transient male population. You lean against the sticky bar, the whiskey warming your belly, the noise and smoke filling your head. You see a poker game starting in the corner, the stakes already rising. You see some of your friends laughing with the saloon girls, whose job was to encourage you to buy more drinks, and perhaps offer other services for a price. The entire environment is designed to separate you from your money in the most entertaining way possible. You came to town to get clean, but you've walked into a place that, in its own way, is just as dirty as the trail. You take another sip of whiskey. It feels like a fitting end to your long, filthy journey. You've had your bath. You're wearing new clothes. You've eaten something that wasn't cooked over a campfire, and you're a few whiskeys deep. You're starting to feel human again, maybe even a little bit confident. With your pockets still jingling with what's left of your pay, your thoughts might turn to seeking female companionship. And in a cow town, that usually meant heading to the brothel. The brothels were an open and accepted part of the town's economy. They were often located in a specific section of town, sometimes called the Badlands or the Red Light District, away from the respectable homes and businesses. You and your friends, emboldened by alcohol, make your way to one of these establishments. It might be a fancy, two-story building with red curtains in the windows, or it might be a simple crib, a one-room shack at the edge of town. You knock on the door, and it's opened by the madam, a formidable businesswoman who runs the house with an iron fist. She sizes you and your friends up with a critical eye. And this is where you encounter a surprising and often humiliating roadblock. She takes one look at your group of cowboys, fresh off the trail, and says, "Sorry boys. Come back after you've been in town a week. We don't serve trail hands." The door is shut in your face. You are stunned. Rejection. Why, you have money. You've just had a bath. What's the problem? The answer lies at the very heart of our story. You are still, fundamentally, too dirty. This is the central, ironic twist of the cowboy's life. After months of grueling, filthy labor, you arrive in town with the means to enjoy its pleasures, only to be told that the very job that gave you the money has made you too disgusting to be served. The brothel, madame, a pragmatist running a business, knew a few things about cowboys that you hadn't considered. First, the bath you just had was a temporary, surface-level cleaning. She knew that a single soak in a tub of shared, murky water wasn't enough to wash away months of ingrained filth. The dirt under your fingernails, the grime in your hair, the lingering odor that clung to you, these were things that took days of repeated washing to truly eliminate. You might think you're clean, but to a person living in the relative cleanliness of the town, you still carried the unmistakable aura of the trail. Second, and more importantly, was the issue of disease. And not just the ones you were thinking of. The madam's primary concern was not just venereal disease, though that was certainly a risk. Her bigger fear was lice. Your hair and your bedroll were infested with lice, ticks, and other pests. These insects would be transferred to her girls, her furniture, and her expensive linens. A louse infestation could shut down her business for weeks, costing her a fortune. It was a far greater and more certain economic threat than anything else a cowboy brought with him. So many madams had a strict no cowboys until they've deloused policy. They needed you to be in town long enough to have washed your clothes multiple times, slept in a real bed, and gotten rid of your tiny, crawling companions. This practice is a fascinating and rarely told part of the history of the West. It completely shatters the romantic myth of the cowboy as a desirable, heroic figure. In the eyes of some of the town's most pragmatic business people, you were a walking, talking pest control problem. Some establishments had their own, more direct, methods for dealing with this. A less reputable brothel might let you in, but only after you'd been subjected to a mandatory, and often humiliating inspection and cleansing process in the back room, sometimes involving harsh chemical powders of dubious safety. Historians who study the social and economic history of sex work on the frontier see these policies as a form of professional risk management. These women were operating in a dangerous and unregulated environment. They had to create their own rules for health and safety. The rejection of cowboys was not personal, it was a sound business decision. It also highlights the stark class and hygiene distinctions in the town. There were high-class brothels that catered to merchants, railroad men, and wealthy ranchers, and there were lower-class cribs that would take anyone's money, including a filthy, louse-ridden cowboy. Your ability to access these services was a direct reflection of your perceived level of cleanliness. So you stand there on a dark street in front of a closed door, rejected and confused. All the hardships of the trail, the dust, the sweat, the stampede as you endured it all, dreaming of this moment. And you were turned away because of a few tiny insects. It's a deeply humbling experience. The tough, rugged cowboy hero of the plains has been defeated by a louse. You turn away with your friends, your pockets full of money but your pride deeply wounded. You head back to the saloon, The one place that will always take you, as long as your money is good. The irony is as thick and foul as the mud in the street. After the humiliation at the brothel and with the saloons beginning to feel repetitive and draining, all you want is a place to sleep. Not on the hard, cold ground, but a real bed with a mattress and maybe even a pillow. Your destination is one of the town's hotels or, more likely, a cheaper boarding house. You find a place with the simple sign rooms, 50 cents a night. It seems like a bargain. You pay your money to the proprietor, a tired-looking woman with a permanent expression of disapproval, and she hands you a key. You trudge up a rickety set of stairs to your room. You open the door and are met with a small, stuffy space that smells of stale errand and washed bodies. The room is often just a large dormitory, a long hall filled with rows of simple iron-frame beds. Privacy is not part of the package. You will be sharing this space with a dozen other men, other cowboys, down on their luck, miners, transient laborers, all snoring, coughing, and muttering in their sleep. But your 50 cents doesn't even guarantee you a whole bed. The most common arrangement in these cheap establishments was to rent out a bed for an 8-hour shift. This was known as hot bedding. You might pay for the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. When you wake up, another man, maybe a night shift worker from the railroad, is waiting to take your place in the still warm bed. The establishment could rent the same bed to 3 different men in a 24-hour period, maximizing their profits. You are not just sharing a room, you are sharing the intimate space of your bed with complete strangers. You look at the bed itself. The mattress is a thin, lumpy sack filled with straw or corn husks. It rustles every time you move. And then there are the sheets. Clean is a relative term. The sheets might be changed once a week if you're lucky. More likely, they are left on the bed for multiple occupants, accumulating a rich collection of sweat, hair, and who knows what else. You run your hand over the grayish, rough fabric and try not to think about the parade of unwashed bodies that have slept here before you. And, of course, the bed bugs. These boarding houses were infested with them. You might not see them at first, but as you settle in for the night, they will emerge from the cracks in the wooden bed frame and the seams of the mattress, drawn by the warmth of your body. You will wake up in the morning covered in itchy red welts. It's a miserable, unavoidable part of the experience. This brings us to a particularly curious and unappetizing detail of boarding house life, the board part of the name. If your lodging came with meals, you would eat in a communal dining room downstairs. The food was often as questionable as the bedding. But the table manners were a spectacle of their own. A common feature was the one-armed lunch, where men would be so protective of their plates in the crowded, competitive dining room that they would loop one arm around their plate while shoving food into their mouths with the other. Utensils were often shared and poorly washed, and the conversation was minimal, punctuated mostly by the sounds of slurping and chewing. Even the water pitcher and glasses on the table were a source of contagion. A single tin cup or glass might be used by everyone at the table, passed from person to person without any pretense of cleaning. Historians who study the living conditions of the working class in the 19th century see these boarding houses as a critical, if grim, part of the social fabric. They provided essential, low-cost housing for the massive, mobile workforce that powered America's westward expansion. They were also hotbeds of disease and social friction. An academic might study the epidemiology of transient housing, tracing how diseases like influenza or tuberculosis could spread rapidly through a population via these crowded, ninja-giffinic dormitories. You lie down on the lumpy, rustling mattress trying to find a comfortable position. You don't take off all your new clothes provides a thin, psychological barrier against the questionable sheets. The man in the bed next to you is snoring like a freight train. The air is thick and hard to breathe. You can feel the telltale itch of a bed bug on your arm. This is the civilization you craved. This is the comfort you dreamed of on the trail. A lumpy mattress, dirty sheets, and a room full of snoring strangers. It is, in its own way, almost as uncomfortable as sleeping on the ground. At least on the prairie. The air was fresh and the stars were bright. Here, your view is a water-stained ceiling, and your companions are bed bugs and the ghosts of 100 other tired, dirty men. You close your eyes and wish, just for a moment, that you were back on the trail. So far, our journey has been a relentlessly male one. We focused on the filth and hardship of the cowboys, the blacksmiths, and the saloon patrons. But what about the other half of the population? What was the hygiene situation like for the women of the frontier? You might assume it was better. But in many ways, it was a unique and even more challenging struggle. Let's shift our perspective. You are now a respectable woman living in this same dusty cow town. You might be the wife of a merchant, a school teacher, or a laundress. Your life is governed by a strict set of social expectations and a wardrobe that is fantastically ill-suited to the environment. Your daily uniform consists of multiple, heavy layers. You start with a chemise, a simple linen shift. Over that goes a corset, a rigid cage of hollow bone and steel that cinches your waist and restricts your breathing. Then comes a corset cover, multiple petticoats to create the fashionable bell-shaped silhouette, and finally, a heavy dress made of wool or thick cotton, with a high collar and long sleeves. The hem of your dress is designed to skim the ground, a fashionable but horrifically impractical detail. Now imagine navigating the filthy streets of the cowtown in this get-up. Every step is a battle. You have to lift your heavy skirts to avoid dragging them through the mud, manure, and garbage. The dust kicked up by wagons and horses clings to the fabric. The high collar and tight corset are suffocating in the summer heat, trapping sweat against your skin and often leading to heat-rash and fainting spells. Bathing for you is an even more complicated ordeal than it was for the cowboys. While a man could just strip down and jump in a river or a bathtub, a woman's modesty required a much more private and laborious process. A full-body bath was a weekly, not daily ritual. It involved hauling and heating buckets of water, filling a small tin tub in the privacy of your kitchen or bedroom, and then undertaking the complex process of washing, while trying to maintain some level of decorum, even when alone. For daily hygiene, most women relied on a simple sponge bath, using a basin of water, a washcloth, and soap to clean their face, neck, hands, and underarms. The full, immersive bath was a luxury, and just like in the men's bathhouses, the water was often conserved. A mother might bathe herself and then use the same water for her children. And what about menstruation in an age before disposable sanitary products? This was a particularly difficult challenge. Women used homemade pads made from scraps of linen, cotton, or even moss, which had to be washed by hand and reused. It was a private, hidden, and often uncomfortable reality, adding another layer of hygiene complexity to a woman's life. This aspect of history is often completely ignored, but it was a fundamental part of female existence. Academics in the field of women's history have had to piece together this story from diaries and household medical guides, uncovering a hidden world of female ingenuity and endurance. This brings us to a strange and counterintuitive belief of the era, the fear of overwashing. Many doctors and advice manuals of the 19th century warned that excessive bathing, especially with hot water, could be dangerous. It was believed to strip the body of its natural oils, open the pores to disease-carrying miasmas, and could even be a shock to the nervous system, particularly for delicate or pregnant women. A woman might be advised to bathe less frequently during her menstrual cycle for fear of chilling the womb. It was a medical worldview that saw the body as a fragile system that needed to be protected from the shock of too much cleanliness. Laundry for a woman was a Herculean task. A cowboy had one set of clothes to worry about. A typical middle-class woman was responsible for washing the clothes for her entire family. This was an all-day affair, often called Blue Monday, that involved boiling clothes in a giant copper pot, scrubbing them on a washboard with harsh lye soap, wringing them out by hand, and hanging them to dry. The sheer physical labor was immense. So while the cowboy's filth was a product of his transient, outdoor life, a woman's hygiene struggles were fought on a different front. It was a battle against restrictive clothing, inadequate sanitation, laborious domestic chores, and a medical establishment that was often more harmful than helpful. Her world was supposed to be the clean and civilized counterpart to the man's rough world, but maintaining that illusion required a constant, exhausting, and largely invisible struggle. Starched apron of the frontier woman was not a sign of an easy life. It was a hard-won victory in a never-ending war against dirt. In a world without daily showers, deodorant, or effective antiperspirant, everyone, to put it mildly, had a certain aroma. The battle against body odor was a constant, and mostly losing fight. The methods used were a fascinating, and sometimes strange, combination of masking, absorbing, and wishful thinking. Let's return to your perspective as a cowboy, now lingering in town. You've had your bath, but after a day of walking around in the heat, drinking in a stuffy saloon, and sweating in a crowded boarding house, your clean feeling is rapidly fading. You are becoming aware, once again, of your own human scent. For men, the solutions were limited and crude. The primary weapon in the war against body odor was simply to ignore it. It was so ubiquitous that it was considered a normal part of the male presence. A certain level of manly scent, a combination of sweat, tobacco, and leather, was not just accepted but sometimes even expected. However, for a special occasion, perhaps trying to impress a saloon girl who hadn't already rejected you, you might employ some of the grooming aids available at the general store or barber shop. You could purchase a bottle of Florida water or Canum water. These were popular, inexpensive colognes with a citrus and spice scent. You wouldn't apply them sparingly to your pulse points. You would splash it on liberally, dousing your face, neck, and even your clothes. The goal was not subtlety, it was overwhelming olfactory firepower. You were trying to mask the underlying scent with a more powerful, more socially acceptable one. You would smell like a strange combination of a man who hasn't bathed properly under fruit basket. Another common product was talcum powder. After a shave, the barber would dust your face with it. You could also buy tins of it to use on your body. Talc is absorbent, and it could help to dry up sweat and reduce chafing. It was a primitive form of antiperspirant, and while it didn't stop the sweating, it could make the results a little less unpleasant. Some powders were scented, adding another layer to the aromatic camouflage. Now let's consider the women's side of things again. For the respectable woman, controlling body odor was a much more serious social imperative. A woman was expected to be a bastion of dignitas and purity, and a noticeable body odor was a sign of moral and social failure. Her methods were a bit more refined, but no less challenging. Like the men, she used scented waters and perfumes. But she also employed dress shields, which were pads of absorbent, often rubber-lined, fabric that could be pinned or sewn into the underarms of a dress. These were designed to absorb sweat and protect the delicate fabric of the dress from staining and odor. They had to be removed and washed frequently. A common home remedy was to use a simple astringent, like witch hazel or a solution of vinegar and water, to wipe the underarms. These would help to kill some of the odor-causing bacteria and close the pores temporarily. Another method was to use a powder made from cornstarch or baking soda as a homemade deodorant. These are methods that are still used in some natural hygiene circles today, a testament to their simple effectiveness. This brings us to a peculiar and intimate detail of 19th century hygiene: the belief that certain foods cause body odor. It was widely thought that eating spicy or strongly flavored foods like garlic, onions, or certain meats could taint the sweat, making it more offensive. Advice manuals for young ladies often included dietary recommendations, suggesting a bland diet to ensure a pure and inoffensive personal scent. The very fabrics people wore played a role. Wool worn by cowboys is naturally breathable and odor-resistant. Cotton and linen, worn by most townspeople, absorb moisture and bacteria readily, and needed to be washed frequently to avoid smelling sour. Silk was a luxury, but it was also notorious for holding on to sweat stains and odors. Historians who study the history of the senses argue that people in the 19th century had a much higher tolerance for smells that a modern person would find overpowering. The ambient scentscape of daily life, from horse manure in the streets to coal smoke in the air to unwashed bodies in a crowded room, was simply much more intense. The academic debate revolves around whether they were really nose-blind to it, or if they were highly attuned to a different hierarchy of smells, where the scent of a clean, starched shirt was a powerful status symbol precisely because it was so difficult to achieve. So, you stand in the street, a freshly bathed cowboy doused in cheap cologne. A well-dressed lady walks by, her petticoats rustling, leaving a faint trail of violet-scented powder. For a moment, you both exist in your own little clouds of artificial fragrance, a temporary truce in the unending, unwinnable war against the simple, biological reality of human sweat. It was a battle fought not with science, but with perfume powder and a profound sense of home. You've been in town for a week now. You spent most of your money, your new clothes are starting to look lived in, and the novelty of civilization is wearing off. The town, which at first seemed like a vibrant oasis, now feels small, dirty, and a little bit dangerous. And then a new kind of fear begins to ripple through the streets, a fear far greater than any drunken brawl or a high-stakes poker game. The fear of disease. It starts with a rumor. A man on the eastbound train was taken ill. A family in a sod house on the edge of town has come down with a violent sickness. The whispers get louder, it's cholera. Cholera was the great, terrifying plague of the 19th century. It struck with breathtaking speed and lethality. A person could be perfectly healthy in the morning and dead by nightfall. The symptoms were horrific severe diarrhea and vomiting that lead to massive, rapid dehydration. The victim's skin would turn bluish-gray, their eyes would sink into their sockets, and they would be tormented by agonizing muscle cramps. The cause, a bacterium called Vibrio cholerae spread through contaminated water, was not yet fully understood by the general public. To the people of the cowtown it was a mysterious, invisible poison that could strike anyone, anywhere. Suddenly, the town's abysmal sanitation is no longer just an unpleasant fact of life, it is a death sentence. Every aspect of the town's filth becomes a source of terror. The muddy, garb latrine pits, the shallow wells located just yards from cesspools, they are all now seen as potential sources of the plague. The miasma theory, the belief in disease carrying bad smells, comes roaring back with a vengeance. People start burning barrels of tar in the streets, hoping the thick, acrid smoke will purify the air. They stuff their pockets with garlic and camphor, believing the strong smells will ward off the sickness. A grim panic sets in. The saloons empty out. The businesses close their doors. People bar themselves inside their homes. The town marshal and a hastily formed citizens committee might try to enforce a quarantine, posting armed guards on the roads to prevent anyone from leaving or entering. But it's too late. The bacterium is already in the water supply. You see it happen. One of your friends from the trail, a strong young man who survived stampedes and river crossings, complains of a stomachache. Within hours, he is writhing in agony in his lumpy bed at the boarding house. There is nothing anyone can do. The treatments are useless. The blacksmith, dentist, and the barber surgeon are powerless against this. They might try to force laudanum, an opium tincture, or calomel, a mercury compound, down the victim's throat, but it does nothing to stop the relentless dehydration. The man dies, his body a shrunken, desiccated husk. The boarding house becomes a death trap. The shared water pitcher, the poorly washed utensils, the close proximity of the sick and the healthy, it's a perfect environment for the disease to spread. The proprietor might try to cover it up, secretly disposing of the bodies at night to avoid a panic, but the truth always gets out. This is where the true horror of the town's hygiene becomes starkly visible. There are no official undertakers or morticians. Dealing with the dead is a terrifying, practical problem. The bodies of cholera victims, themselves teeming with bacteria, are highly infectious. They are hastily wrapped in sheets, the same sheets they died in, unburied as quickly as possible in a mass grave dug on a hill outside of town. There are no coffins, no funerals, no dignity. Historians who study epidemics on the frontier describe these events as social collapse. All the normal rules and structures of the community break down in the face of overwhelming, inexplicable death. The bonds of friendship and neighborliness are replaced by fear and suspicion. It was every man for himself. The academic field of historical epidemiology tracks these outbreaks, using town records, newspaper archives, and personal diaries to map the spread of the disease and understand its devastating impact on these fragile frontier communities. You are trapped. Your money is almost gone. The trail outfit you came with has already moved on with a new herd. The trains are not running. The roads are blocked. You are stuck in a town that is slowly being consumed by a plague it cannot understand or fight. The filth that you once accepted as a part of life has now revealed its true, deadly nature. You hide in your cheap room, listening to the unnatural quiet of the streets, punctuated by the occasional scream or the rumble of the death cart making its rounds. You drink only whiskey, hoping the alcohol will protect you. You avoid touching anything or anyone. The romantic adventure of the West has curdled into a nightmare of paranoia and disease. You didn't get shot by an outlaw or trampled by a stampede. You might die here, in a dirty bed in a forgotten town, because of a drop of contaminated water. The panic lasts for weeks, but like a fire, the epidemic eventually burns itself out. It kills a significant portion of the town's population and then, as mysteriously as it arrived, it recedes. The quarantines are lifted. The saloons tentatively reopen. A fragile, traumatized sense of normalcy returns. You have survived. The experience has changed you. The town, which once seemed like a paradise of civilization, now feels like a graveyard. The faces of the friends you lost are everywhere. The carefree bravado you arrived with has been replaced by a hollowed-out weariness. The money is gone, spent on overpriced goods, bad whiskey, and simply surviving. It's time to leave. Your journey in the West is coming to an end. You have a choice to make. You could sign on with another cattle drive, heading back south to do it all over again. The thought of it, the dust, the filth, the monotony fills you with a profound sense of dread. You could try to find work here in this town scarred by death, but the opportunities are few. Or you could do what many former cowboys did, you could go home. You scrape together your last few dollars and buy a one-way ticket on the eastbound train. As you sit on the hard wooden bench, waiting for the train to depart, you reflect on the chasm between the myth and the reality of your adventure. The posters back east showed a heroic figure, clean and noble, against a majestic landscape. Your reality was a story written in dirt, sweat, and manure. You were not a hero taming the wilderness, a cog in an industrial machine that moved beef from one place to another, living in conditions that would shock the very people who romanticized your existence. The train begins to move, pulling away from the dusty town. You look out the window at the receding plains, the landscape that has been your home and your prison for the better part of a year. You feel a strange mix of relief and a surprising, bittersweet nostalgia. You hated the filth, the discomfort, the danger. But there was also a raw, untamed freedom to it that you know you will never experience again. There was the simple camaraderie of the campfire, the breathtaking beauty of an untouched sunrise, the deep satisfaction of a hard day's work done. You were leaving behind a world of profound contradictions. It was a place of immense opportunity and brutal exploitation. It was a place of incredible natural beauty and staggering human filth. It was a place that promised independence, but often delivered a life of debt and dependency. This brings us to the final, lingering question that historians still grapple with. Why do we, as a culture, cling so tightly to the sanitized, romantic myth of the cowboy? Why do we prefer the clean, heroic image of John Wayne to the dirty, lice-ridden reality of the historical trailhand? The academic theory is that the cowboy myth fulfills a deep national need. It's a creation story for modern America, a tale of rugged individualism, of taming a wild frontier, of manifest destiny. Powerful narrative that papers over the much more complex and often ugly truths of westward expansion, the displacement of Native Americans, the environmental degradation, the exploitation of labor. The myth is easier and more comforting than the reality. Your journey has been a deep dive into that uncomfortable reality. You have lived the unglamorous truth. You have felt the chafing of filthy clothes, tasted the grit of trail dust, smelled the stench of a cowtown street, and felt the cold terror of an epidemic. You learned why a clean-living cowboy was a contradiction in terms, and why a pragmatic brothel madam would value deloused linens over a pocketful of cash. As the train picks up speed, carrying you back toward a world of paved streets, regular baths, and clean sheets, you catch your reflection in the dusty window. You look different. You are thinner, your face is weathered, and your eyes hold a haunted, knowing look. You are no longer the naive farm boy who believed in posters. You have seen the West, not the one from the storybooks but the real one, and the dirt of that reality is now a part of you, a stain on your memory that will never truly wash away. You are going home, but you know that in a way, you will never fully leave the trail behind. And now, the train's gentle rocking begins to feel different. The clatter of the wheels on the track softens, fading into a rhythmic, lulling hum. The dusty plains outside your window are blurring, the sharp edges of the landscape melting into soft, hazy colors, like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The weariness in your bones is no longer a sharp ache, but a deep, heavy comfort, the feeling of a long, long journey finally coming to its end. You can feel yourself sinking, not into the lumpy mattress of a boarding house, but into something far softer, far more welcoming. The memories of the trail, the grit, the smells, the endless horizon are no longer sharp-edged anxieties, but distant echoes, like a story someone told you a long time ago. The face of the trail boss, the sound of the cook's call, the heat of the sun, they all begin to drift, swirling together into the quiet, dark tapestry of a dream. You are no longer on the train. You are floating in that peaceful space between wakefulness and sleep, that gentle current carrying you toward rest. The weight of your journey lifts, and all that is left is the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing, a quiet anchor in the peaceful dark. The story is over. Your adventure is done. The end of the article. Good night.